We're here with Scarlett Kol, published author of Mercury Rises, a dystopian retelling of Robin Hood with a romance twist, and Wicked Descent, the story of Avery Belmont and her family's dark secrets.
You
Is
bet.
that a correct depiction of those two novels?
Very, very correct.
Awesome. So maybe to start us off, how did you start writing?
I don't think it was more of I started writing. It's just once I learned to write, stories kind of came out. As a kid, I defined myself as a storyteller. My teachers always used to put talks too much. I like to call it a storyteller. I was always telling everybody everything, way too overly dramatic. I talk with my hands a lot. Big stories all the time. And so by the time I learned to write, and I was a very, very heavy reader, so eventually it was just kind of a natural progression for me was to start writing. So when I was a kid, probably about 10 to 12, started writing some really awful poetry and some really, really awful short stories. But I did get a little bit better. I won a few contests around 16, 17, and then kind of took a break for a while, getting into, university and textbooks and all that kind of stuff, and then kind of came back to it in my late 20s.
That's awesome. What was that jump moment that made you decide to start writing, or at least start pursuing it more seriously than just your own poetry in your own, whether it's journal or diary or
Sure.
something along those?
Sad to say, I hate to admit this, but really it came down to Twilight. Not that it was my favorite book or anything, but growing up, I was a huge Anne Rice fan. I read it way too early, wildly inappropriate, and massive Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan. I was the same age as Buffy when it came out, and I kind of grew up with her and all of those kinds of stories. I read Stephen King from what I could stomach because I'm actually a huge scaredy cat. Dean Koontz thriller novels and all that kind of stuff. So as you grow up, you start to think that, you can't be into those sorts of things, those magical and mystical kind of stories and characters and all that sort of stuff. It feels like something for kids. And then all of a sudden, a friend of mine is like, you need to read this book called Twilight. You'll love it. And so I sat down and I read this book. And I read Stephenie Meyer's story about how she kind of came to it in her early 30s, that she wanted to write this book and that she could do this. And I kind of thought to myself, I'm like, hey, it's all back, which is awesome. I'm so excited to be in this environment now that all those things that I loved and ever since I was a kid are now, I guess, like cool and trendy again. I don't think paranormal ever really goes away. It just kind of like submerges for another trend that flies through, but it always circles back around. And I loved Stephenie Meyer's story in the sense that, she just wanted to write this story, and it didn't matter that she wasn't in early 20s ingenue anymore. She could just do this. And I was at this point in my life where I was almost finished my chartered accountancy designation. I had a couple of degrees under my belt already, and I was coming to that point in my life of trying to figure out who I was again. I had, I'd 2 degrees and a CA, take a lot of studying, so I'd spent a lot of my extra time working on those things. I'd gotten married, I had a kid, I'd built a house, I'd done all of those checkbox things that people kind of have in their head of what you're going to do, and I was getting to that point of trying to remember who I was again. And I was going into job interviews and things like that, and then be like, what do you like to do for fun? And like, I listen to music sometimes, because I couldn't even think anymore. I'd spent all of my spare time had been to all of these projects and planning weddings and blueprints and all of this kind of stuff. And so I started writing again, and I started originally, I tried to write a serious book, something that would be on Oprah's book club and make people cry and maybe win awards and stuff. And it was so boring. And it's a good story, but I couldn't do it. And after reading Twilight and all this kind of stuff, I was like, you know what? I'm going to write what I love, and I write what I really, really enjoy. So I started this story, and it's really great. I never finished it. But, and then I got into Wicked Descent. It came a little bit faster, came together a little bit better. And thank you for the promo. And so I started doing those things, and I didn't really tell anybody for a long time. I was just this closet writer, and it was just something I kind of did on the side. And then so that was in about 2007 when I started doing that. In 2013, I came to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm either doing this for myself or I'm going to need to try to publish it. And if I'm going to try to publish it, somebody needs to read it other than me. So I had been actually in Selkirk, and I saw a sign for a genre writers group that met on Saturdays. So I called up the library and I tried to get their information, and they gave me like 3 wrong numbers and all this kind of stuff. And I never got a hold of anybody. And then one day I'm like, I'm just going to go. And I got up and went there to the library, and I said, I have no idea who you are, and I don't know if you'll take me, but I need to learn about writing. And yeah, will you take me on? So they did. And actually I figured out that I wasn't as good as I thought I was, which was great because they helped break me down quite a bit and build me back up and learn how to do things properly. And it just kind of gave me avenues to start with. And then I started doing all of that reading and researching and all of that energy I'd spent in studying to study writing and to learn how to write better and sentence structure and how to plot properly and all that kind of stuff. So that was in 2013. I had written probably about 90% of Wicked Descent at that point. I rewrote the entire book from everything that I'd learned, and then put it out there to try and get it published and see what happened. So,
however, I always find I have mental blocks when I write, and one of them is that if I'm not in the same emotional state that the writing needs to be in, that I can't write it. Do you have any like sort of mental blocks, or do you find you have any mental blocks when you write your books?
oh, absolutely. Writing is a hugely mental game. I was actually talking with a friend about this the other day. Another writer friend who has a book that just came out, Celebrity Spin Doctor, Celia Mulder. If you like contemporary romance. Anyways, we were talking about how mental writing can be. And like you were saying about not being in being in the right state when you're trying to write a scene. I totally get that. I listen to music quite a bit when I'm writing. It's usually stuff that I've heard before, but I create soundtracks for books and things like that. And I think one of the reasons authors do that is to get into that mindset. It's to get, if you're writing in a romantic scene and you've had an awful, awful day, unless you're just want it to take you away, it's hard to get there. And, there's some scenes like I have, trigger warning, there's some abuse topics in Mercury Rises. And so some of those scenes are hard to write. Like they're difficult to, deal with those emotions and put yourself out there, like emotionally with these characters. And, if you're not in that right mindset, you're not doing it any justice either, because you're not, these are heavy topics that need to be dealt with delicately and properly. So, if you're not in that right mindset, it is very, very difficult. One of the biggest, I second guess myself a lot when I'm writing. I write quite slowly, not the physical writing itself, but I'm always second guessing what I'm writing and does this make sense and all this kind of thing. And then I change it and then I change it back. And that really slows down my writing process. But the one thing that I've had the hardest block with is actually now that I'm published, it's actually almost harder trying to write. And you kind of touched on this a little bit that, if you take everybody else's impressions, then it's not your story anymore. So my publisher has said that if I can deliver the book, that they will be interested in publishing a sequel to Mercury Rises. And I mentioned earlier that some people were asking for it. And it was set up that way that, I could continue it if I chose to and the opportunity arose. And it's been very difficult to draft that novel because I do have reviews out and I do have people saying, oh, I love this couple, or this is great. And I can't see, so excited to see what happens with this character and that. And, I kind of have some preconceptions of what I wanted to do in my head. And I was like, well, I was going to follow this character, but everybody loves this character. And, maybe I should be doing this, or should I follow through with what I had planned? Or maybe I need to rejig it a little bit. So I'm kind of throwing out some breadcrumbs to those certain areas. And then there, any reviews that haven't been super positive that, maybe I should be taking that, or is it just their opinion? And it's really taken its toll and slowed me down quite a bit because you now have all of these other voices in your head rather than just your own self-doubt and your own blocks. You have, all of these other opinions of all these people that you've never even met before feeding into your process and what you're trying to do.
I've never thought about that, but I guess that makes sense. It's almost like you're not writing for yourself anymore. You're trying to please everyone else with your writing.
And I don't really want to do that either, because
for sure.
like you said, it still needs to be your story in the end. And I still want to make people happy, right? Like I don't want to exactly, oh, everybody likes this character, let's kill them off. I'm not that kind of person yet.
No Game of Thrones style.
No.
Kill off the main character, third chapter in.
No. I've done some nasty things to my characters, I'm not going to lie. And I do remember the first editor for Wicked Descent, she's like, so I read this chapter and I've always learned that you're never allowed to do that, but I totally understand why you did it. So if you're going to do it, you need to be way more insidious. She's like, I never actually thought I would say that to a person before. So I'm like, okay. And then, I had to work on it and do some more research and was very scared of what Google was going to show me. But kind of thing. It was, so I am not opposed to doing with what I want to do with it. But even though I'm doing my story, there's always that voice in my head of, am I making the right decision? Is there going to be backlash from what I write? Because people didn't want it to turn out that way, even though that's the way I want to do it. So in the end, I'll probably still do it my way. I worry about that I'm not going to make people happy, but on the same note, I'm also worried that I don't want to concede to people either.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
And you're not going to make everyone happy.
Exactly.
I think you're going to have people that are going to hate the ending, right? And that goes for everything.
Oh,
any
absolutely.
Sequel,
Absolutely.
Any films, books, like TV shows.
I'm still mad about How I Met Your Mother. I'm just not happy with that.
A lot of people are unhappy with that one.
So then what led you to writing about these dark worlds and some of these mystical creatures and things? I know you had always had a belief in magic, and then to have that incorporated in your stories. Where did that come about? And also, what's the draw? I feel like in our culture, especially Twilight, the Harry Potters of the world, the Lord of the Rings, there's almost followings, like large followings, and there's something about these stories that draw people in. So what was it about that in your life that drew you in and made you want to put that into your novels as well?
Well, first off, it's fun. Like, you can do anything you want to do. Mercury Rises has no magic in it at all. It is dystopian based, so, kind of like that Hunger Games Divergent, but almost like near dystopian in the sense that it's like 10 iPhones up, so not super out there or anything. And I never actually intended it for it to be dystopian. I originally started writing that book as a contemporary romance, like cute little high school story, and then it totally went off the rails. And then I'm like, okay, well, I need to make it paranormal then, because everything else is paranormal, and the story's like, nah, not gonna happen. So I had to, give way and write the story that it was meant to be, and it ended up following in that dystopian category. I didn't write it with that intent. In terms of the paranormal stuff, though, like I said, it's fun, and it actually plays on a lot of different things. In terms of just like broadening your world. Like, I grew up in Northern Manitoba in like a reasonably sized city, but very isolated. Like the closest like city or metropolitan type of area is 8.5 hour drive.
Wow.
So, and at that time, like, the internet existed, but there was no buying stuff online. There was no ordering things, kind of stuff. You had your Hotmail account, and that was pretty much it. Anyone who was like severely into gaming might know a little bit better, and it was still in text. So, it's you didn't have that kind of outlet where you could just go into other things. So for me, and being a huge reader and not the most sporty person, I read a lot of books, and it was an outlet for me in terms of, it was a different world. It was something that I hadn't seen before. It was somewhere else that wasn't where I was. Not that I wasn't happy where I was, but it's very isolated. So, these books can take you somewhere else. It's very like escapist type of literature, right? Like, people get involved with these things because of it takes them to another place. And so that's kind of what I got into as a kid. And not only that, it allows you, which I find really cool, especially with teen fiction and children's literature. It does it with adults as well, but you can be a little bit more above board on it. In terms of these sorts, you can touch very, very dark topics, but it's okay because these things aren't real, kind of thing. Like, and it's kind of got that mentality where you can talk about these really, really, really heavy subjects, where if you tried to do it in a contemporary setting, people are like, whoa.
Yeah,
like,
too far.
That's too much.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about it, in terms of these fictional characters and magic and all of this kind of stuff, you can go into these like dark or adverse type of topics. And, you know, it's still seen okay kind of thing. Like you can have that weight without scaring people off, essentially. I feel I have a nice balance understanding the business angle of things and the art side of things. If I'd gone straight into, like if I had immersed myself straight into the art area of it, you know, I could be a very different person. Like you said, I may not have, you know, pursued an accounting degree, which would be I would be a very different person. I would have a very different life. I'd be in a very different job. So that, you know, impacts things hugely. My other degree that I have is criminology. Seems like a very odd pairing with accounting, but, you know, that impacts what I write and how I view things and all that sort of stuff as well, how I see things politically. How I, you know, view different things and different people is impacted by having that education with that degree, even though it doesn't seems like that odd puzzle piece from another puzzle that doesn't fit. You know, it does impact who I am and how I view the world. So
Cool. So what does your writing process look like, and what tips would you have for new writers in the world?
Well, my writing process is a big old mess. One of the big things that they talk about in writing is whether or not you're a plotter or a pantser. I'm both. Most writers are a little bit of both anyway. Usually how mine kind of works out is I'll come up with a little bit of an idea. I will write whatever I can think of in terms of that idea in that little bit of the spark, right? It might be the last chapter. It might be one in the middle. It might be the beginning. And I just kind of roll with it until I've kind of exhausted that stream of consciousness. And then I go, okay, what do I have now? And then I'll kind of take that and then plot it and put it into a story. And then I create a spreadsheet with lots of pretty colors and formulas and math in it. So very not creative kind of process, creating this insane outline. And then I will just kind of write wherever I feel like it. Like you were saying about a block of needing to be in that right space. I do not write chronologically. Hardly ever until I'm further along in the book. I write what I feel like writing that day. If it's a fight scene, if it's a quiet scene, if it's whatever, I write what I feel like writing and start filling in those pieces. And then all of a sudden I'm going to have a lot of those blocks and it's like, okay, now I need to make all of this stuff tie together, and I'll start it right at the beginning and I'll flow all the way through, even the stuff that if I've already written it, I'll fix it or edit it or whatever, and then just write and then finish the story all the way through. And then edit and do all that kind of fun stuff. So that's kind of how I kind of break it down. But in terms of the story itself, it really depends on the story. When I wrote Wicked Descent, it was like, I guess it would be almost like a plant. I, you know, created the seed and everything just started ballooning from there, and I could do this and I can do this and do this. And it was really exciting, and it just kind of grew into this thing. And then now again, you cut stuff off and make it go in a certain direction. And that was great. Like I kind of alluded to with Mercury Rises, it was completely opposite. I kept trying to make it into something else, and it was like, nope, that is not my story. But it was almost like the story was almost written somewhere, and I needed to find it as opposed to creating it myself. It was only I kind of pictured almost like a block of marble. I know what color it is, I know what it feels like, but in the end, I don't know what's in the middle until I start peeling all of this stuff away. And then it kind of built onto itself and became this thing. And that's why I find it really, really interesting, and why it's so different from most of the stuff that I normally write is because I didn't go in there writing that story. That's just the story that was there. And so obviously, even though I did the same process where I wrote what I thought I could write, and then I have the same outlines and pretty colors, they were both very different in terms of how they came to be and how those plots kind of came together. You know, this one I was building the plot, and the other one I was finding it.
What part of the writing process do you enjoy the least?
Depends on the day. Sometimes, like, to tell you the truth, it's the drafting part that I find the hardest. I love coming up with the idea, and I know the story, and I can sit there and tell somebody the story, and I can outline and all of that kind of stuff. I didn't think I liked editing, but I actually really, really do. That's the part where, you know, you take a really crappy chapter and make it sing, right? Like that's when you perfect your language, and that's when you realize, oh yeah, this actually wasn't, like, the idea is fine. It's just I needed to make it that much better kind of thing. And that's where the pieces fall into place and you go, oh yeah, this is a story. This kind of does make sense. And okay, this is like, because my problem with the drafting, it's not that I don't enjoy it. It's that it's the second guessing. It's this is garbage and this doesn't make sense. And these characters are falling in love right here. And I'm not feeling it. Like, I don't know how they get there. Kind of thing. And then going back through editing, at least I get that opportunity to go like, okay, you know what? First off, A, wasn't as terrible as I thought, or it was. And then B, now's the chance for me to make that better or, make all those pieces just totally fall into place. So I think it's not that I enjoy it the least, I just find it the hardest, I think, is just getting that draft out. And because I'll sit there and stare at my computer screen for forever, just trying to get to the next sentence because I'm like, no, I don't like it, or no, I'm just forcing myself to keep going is the hardest part for me.
You mentioned you had an Excel spreadsheet that you used
Yeah.
with all these formulas. What does that look like? What kind of formulas can you use for writing? I ask out of interest because I always have a hard time plotting what I'm writing or trying to
no, for
draft
sure.
what I'm writing.
Well, I've written, I have 2 books here, but I have other manuscripts that I've worked on and I'm working on and all that kind of stuff. So for me, I've kind of realized where kind of my sweet spot is. The Wicked Descent was submitted at 97,000 words. Mercury Rises, I think, was like 86,000 words. They are both final 91 and change. Clearly, this is my sweet spot. Is around that length. I kind of know what kind of books I like to read. I know what I like to write. I kind of have an idea about how long a book's going to be for me. So it's going to be somewhere between 85 to 95,000 words, more or less. Once I've written out those first couple of chapters, I have an idea of the voice. The chapters in Mercury Rises are a little bit shorter. They get longer as the action progresses. Wicked Descent has long chapters. They just are. The book that I'm working on right now, Keeper of Shadows, it's a multiple point of view. Chapters are very short because basically every couple of chapters is essentially like a chapter, even though they're separate scenes because I'm flipping back and forth. So once I have an idea of what that's going to be, I kind of have so if it's going to be so I usually mark it off at about 90,000 words. I have a formula going, okay, so if it's going to be chapters are going to be about 1,500 words or so. And then 1,500 words for 90,000 is going to be X amount of chapters. So this is how much I would think it was going to be. If I split everything into thirds, this is where I would think my turning points are. I use a 3-act structure typically.
Okay.
So this is where I think my turning points are going to be. And then I'm basically putting in, okay, so this is what I have plotted. Does this make sense to those points there? Do they need to be earlier, later? Am I, too much backstory, too much lead in, not enough? Like all that sort of stuff. So I can kind of balance those things a little bit for the book. So it's kind of basically just kind of setting up the template based on what I think is going to happen. And then I also put in, let's say 1,500 words for every chapter. When I'm putting in my points, I'm like, no, this one's going to be longer. This one's going to be shorter. So I kind of put in, so this is my base. This is what I think everything's actually going to kind of come out to. And then just comparing against my actual word counts. And then, further off, I have like my checkpoint of like, do I have the first draft finished? Like, is it in process? Do I have my first draft finished? Have I re-edited it again? And then I have calculations of approximately how many days I think it's going to take me to write based on that many words and what my normal...
Sounds like the accounting side of you coming into your writing.
Oh, exactly. And then I figure out how many days it's going to write, and then I don't write for 3 days, and then it throws everything off anyway, so it doesn't even matter. But I calculate it anyway because that's me. And I'm definitely a spreadsheet dork that way. So, so it's basically just kind of making sure that I'm getting back to that story structure stuff and that I don't, I'm hitting my turning points where I'm supposed to. I haven't created a story that's, 150,000 words because for an average, teen paranormal novel, 150,000 words is a lot. So, it's going to be hard marketability wise, at that point, should I be just doing 2 books? How should I be splitting that kind of stuff? So it kind of keeps me in check a little bit. Plus, with everything else going on in my life, I don't get to write every day. I would love to. It'd be wonderful. And I try. But if I don't get to write it, if for something, if I'm going through a year end and I don't get to touch anything for a month, I have something I can go back to that's very concrete of, okay, this is where you were and this is what you were doing and all that sort of stuff. Most of it changes by the time I get to the end. For for me, I like to know my ending before I start. It's almost never the ending that I actually end up with when I get there, but it gives me a driving force to go through kind of stuff. So, I do have a stringent outline, doesn't follow it, but it's something that keeps me in check and gives me something to go back to. And the outline changes as I go and as things get, and it's also nice to be able to see things too, because if I change something up top, I know I can see where all that fallout is going to be, and I can see where those things are going to need to change. Plus, in the situation of the book that I'm working on now, Keeper of Shadows, I need to be cognizant of whose voice I have certain scenes in. This is actually the most romance-based novel that I've written, and it's, when you have intimate or kissing scenes or something in it, you don't want them in the same character's voice every single time. You want each of the characters to be able to experience those things and explain them and all of those things and experience them. So this gives me a nice overview of making sure that those key scenes, I'm not having the same types of scenes in the same voice all the time.
Interesting. Do you find that, so with the whole voice thing, do you find that ever, like, because you're running, say for the one that's coming out, you have two different voices in it. Do you find that ever like a new voice can come in eventually, or that you find that your own voice is creeping into it sometimes?
A little bit. I think that it's not so much a new voice, but that they start to sound the same.
Okay.
Is more of the risk, I think, that you keep writing and then you forget, oh, wait, this character doesn't talk like that, or, you kind of tone it down a little bit. So editing helps. One of the coolest writing tips I ever got, there's an author named Katie McGarry, and I love her so much. And all of her novels, she writes teen romance novels as well, but they're contemporary. And she writes all of hers in alternating points of view. And I asked her once, I said, how do you manage to pull this off? How do you manage to keep your voices so different? And she said that she listens to different types of music per person. So there's a book called Dare You To. That's one of my favorites. And they have two characters. There's Ryan, and then there's Beth. And Ryan is just sort of the small town baseball star, loves his mom, loves his country kind of thing. And Beth is from a hard upbringing. She's from the city. She's dealt with a lot of stuff in her life. And she's kind of angry at the world through most of the novel. So she said when she would write Ryan's pieces, she would listen to Jason Aldean. So it was very descriptive and drawl and got some flow to it. And when she would write the scenes for Beth, she would listen to Eminem. So all of the language was harsh and blunt, and the characters would think that way. And I found this fascinating. It was really, really interesting that she did this, and she said it's great because I've actually had copy editors tell me that pages have been cut off, and they would know which chapter it was without having to have the title on there.
Wow.
And that's an important thing to have too, because like if somebody stops in the middle of a chapter, not like you ever want them to, but God forbid something happens and they have to stop reading, if they have to come back and try and figure out where they were, you haven't done it right.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Like they should be able to know how the character talks and how they describe things, and how they think that whose voice you're in. So that's something that I've had to spend a lot more time on and a lot more editing time on in this book, is trying to make sure that those voices are distinct and those descriptions are unique to those people and their experiences. And it's a lot more work, but I find it's a lot more interesting too.
What books have helped your writing process the most? Are there any that you've consulted in terms of being able to better edit or help your writing?
I have read On Writing by Stephen King. It's the classic, right? So I wasn't super into the biography. However, the last few chapters, the biography just totally go off the rails, and you're like, why did you not start with that? I don't understand. So if you've read it, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But he just has an interesting perspective on it. I've read a lot of books on trying to write faster. So there's one, I think it's 20K to 100K. That was really, really good. I'm not sure. It's an ebook. I'm not sure who the author is off the top of my head, but it was really good. If you Google it, I have read the Save the Cat, the typical screenwriting books. A lot of the stuff I find though is blogs. I really, really like blog writers because they just seem to break it down a little bit more in blog style than in a book. Editing, I go with what I need. Grammar Girl website is fantastic. So, when I'm struggling with a particular something, I'll go back to like exactly what I'm looking for. It's not like I'm going to read something on editing. I'm going to go to those specific pieces. But for me, I find blog posts the most useful because they just seem to, you can narrow down into a specific topic really quickly, and they tend to like get to the point because they only have a small amount of space to use. One of the ones that's my favorite, and he has turned a lot of this into books. So blog posts become a book kind of thing. And is Chuck Wendig. He writes a blog called Terrible Minds, and it is not suitable for work. And he, in his early stuff, he related everything to Die Hard, which was great. And and uses a lot of colorful language. But he is very good with motivational posts and about process and breaking things down of like, here's 20 things about writing characters. And he's really funny. Which I really appreciate because it's a lot easier to take dry information when it's funny.
What's his name?
Chuck Wendig.
Yeah, something I'm definitely gonna have to check out. It
Yeah,
sounds like
I
something
love Chuck Wendig, and he writes like tie-in fiction for Star Wars, and I think they just optioned one of his things for TV. And I started following him back when it was like I just kind of lost my publisher, and I don't know what's gonna happen with this book and whatever. And now he's like writing comics and video games and tie-in for Star Wars, and he just got some endorsement from Margaret Atwood. Like,
oh wow,
yeah, not Canadian either. And he's funny and he's crass, and I love him. And yeah, some of his more recent, like he hasn't been posting as much recently just because a little bit busier than he used to be. But if you go back into a lot of his archives and stuff, it's great. And he has a lot of, like I said, compilation ebooks from some of his posts, and they're all various sentences that use the word pen monkey in the title. But yeah, no, they're great. And I really, really like them. And he likes to break things down really easily or use really, really good real world examples to be able to tie things in and make sense of it. And he's good with motivation. There's been so many times where I'm like, I'm just stuck on what I'm writing, and then I'll flip into his blog or it'll be off my feed and I'll be like, oh, that's exactly what I need to hear right now. And he's pretty open-minded, and which is good. I love that one. Fiction University is a really good one as well. Just for the basics, they have really structured the website as, okay, so this is on middles, this is on publishing, this is on endings, this is on editing, this is on voice, this is on whatever. And you can really find exactly what you're looking for. She uses really great examples. They do a lot of critique on the weekend. Like every weekend there's a critique up there. I don't read them all the time, but during the week they have a series on indie publishing as well. So they bring in self-published and indie authors to talk about, how to market, how to get more traction with your ebook, how do you even make an ebook, and all of those like basic to more complex various different things, which are really, really good. And I actually just joined a group in September. You actually have to apply, and then if you get in, and then there's interviews and all that sort of stuff. And if you get in, it's called the Breakthrough Writers Boot Camp. And it's run by an editor named Kate Browning, who is just absolutely wonderful. I'd heard her speak at a few different conventions that I've been to, and she has this really, really great understanding with language. And so the way she kind of structures her classes is at the beginning of every month, we create goals that we want to have for our career, and she kind of gives us consultation on where you can go with this. And these are some resources and just kind of like somebody to bounce it off of. And then, at the beginning of the next month, we're going to revisit did you get there? How did this work for you? The first week of the month, there will be an advanced topic on writing or language. So like this past month, it was, advanced language techniques on imagery and all that kind of stuff. The last week of the month, there is a creativity thing, and it's basically she will find something, whether it's a podcast or whether it's a movie or a music video or whatever, that lends itself, or TED Talks, she uses those too, that lends itself to creativity and, feeding the artist as opposed to not necessarily just the business, and then has a chat with all of the authors that are there to kind of go over that and how does that inspire your writing and how it can and this and that and the other thing. And then in the middle of the month is just, it's the nitty gritty, it's queries, it's all that kind of stuff, and editing first pages and live for everybody to see and stuff like that. So that has been really, really useful because she wanted to develop a program that was beyond the basic. It was those authors that, you know where to put your commas generally kind of thing. You know what you're doing. but you want to take your career and what you're doing to the next level, and just trying to figure that out, and also to build a space for people to deal with what's coming next. She's like, there's so much stuff that's going on where publishers will close, or your editor will leave the business, or your agent will, and just knowing what to do in those situations and being able to survive in spite of all of that kind of stuff, if that's what you really want to do. So
I also wanted to know what the biggest obstacle you've had to overcome is.
I think it's probably just myself, to be honest with you. And like you were saying about like going into these places and taking that next step, and, you know, hitting send when you've got it there and you're like, okay, it's great, but you can edit anything. I could edit these books like 5 more times and make them better. But at some point you need to just go, you need to cut bait and move forward. And it's that moving forward that I think is super, super hard for a lot of people. And I think there's probably a lot of writers out there who don't become authors because they get stuck and they don't hit send, and they don't do something with it or whatever. So like just getting over yourself and you know, having that courage to be able to move forward, because it's scary. Everything you do is terrifying. Like for me anyway. You know, it was terrifying to send it out. And the other thing that I find really interesting, and it's not just me, there's a lot of other authors that I know that are like this, there's this fear of success. So it's like, okay, so I'm so scared that nobody's going to buy my book and nobody's going to like it. And so somebody does, okay, well, I'm so scared that the editor's going to rip me a new one and I'm not going to be able to, you know, deal with it. And then they do, and it's fine. And it's like, okay, well, the book comes out and it's actually doing really well. What do I do? What do I do now? Like, I don't know how to deal with being successful. And, you know, like that fear is just kind of all the way through. And the only way through is through, essentially. Right. So, I think just, you know, getting out of my own head and getting over stuff. And when I get blocks and stuff, forcing myself, like taking different routes. One of the things I like to do too, when I find that I'm blocked, is I write pen and paper. I always find that there's some weird connection between pen and paper that my ideas come out a little bit better than when I'm typing them. However, it takes a really, really long time to put all that in the computer. So I'm trying to get better. But you know, it's like in dance with ballet, go back to the bar, you go back to your basics. And so for me, going back to pen and paper sometimes is what I need to do. But you can spin like that forever if you let yourself. If you don't push yourself to move forward, if you don't, you know, overcome the things that are keeping you behind, you will never move forward. Like you can spin for years. And because writing is such a independent thing, no one's going to stop you. No one's going to push you forward but yourself.
That's true.
So you have to be that driving force. At least if you're at work, if you're not getting your work done, your boss is going to be screaming down your neck to get that done. If you're on a contract, that might be a little bit different. But, you know, in terms of getting that first book out or first few books when you're writing on spec and you need to write the entire novel and then sell it, no one's going to push you but yourself. And if they don't, you won't go anywhere.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And I'm just kind of thinking through that. I was thinking of my writing, and I know I've had an idea for a book back since I was in grade 10, and it's kind of evolved since then, but I've rewritten the first chapter of that book. It's got to be 30 plus times now, and I've never been content with it enough to move on, but it's never going to be 100% perfect, right? At the end of the day, you just kind of have to like let it be, move on.
Oh, for sure. And also different points in your life are different things. Like, maybe 5 books from now, I would not be happy with what I've put out, but it happened, and it built. And the book that I would have put out then is what that was built upon. That's the foundation of building that up.
Right. So you wouldn't be where you are now if you didn't have that then.
I read an interesting Twitter feed the other day, thread from Victoria Schwab. She writes, or V Schwab. She writes Darker Shade of Magic, the Monsters of Verity, which is a teen series, and a few other things. She writes fantasy, and I love her to pieces. And she has a new book that came out on Tuesday called Vengeful, and the first book was called Vicious. And it was one of those ones where she said she was in the middle of, she was in between contracts. She didn't know what to do. So she wrote a book for herself because it was just something she really, really wanted to write, and people really, really attached to it. And it's a fantastic book, and she's a beautiful writer. And so she ended up writing the sequel several years later, and it just came out. And she had a thread on her Twitter the other day saying that she wrote this book and she turned it in January, and her agent calls her up and she said, it's the hardest conversation I've ever had in my life. She's like, I've released 15 books. They've optioned A Darker Shade of Magic for film. She just signed this like contract in the summer for boatloads of money. Like, she's doing fine. And her agent was like, this book isn't good enough for you for where you are in your career. And it's completely up to you, and I will support you no matter what you do, but I think you need to redo it. And she's like, not revise, not edit, redo it.
Wow.
And she's like, and so I deleted this book and started over. And she said, and it will come out tomorrow, 'cause it's the day before it was releasing. And she said, it's the strongest book I've ever written. And I'm sure for her and for anybody else who's ever written anything, that is terrifying. That is
No
months
kidding.
and months of work and all that sort of stuff that she's put into it. And it was for somebody else to recognize and be like, you know what, you are so much better writer than this. And she even said, like, some of your fans will be fine with this book, and it will be okay. And if you put it out, that will be fine. But you are so much better than this. And she took it in and came out with it. And I haven't read it yet, but I'm very excited. But it's that being able to take that step and being able to push yourself forward, because she could have chose not to, but she chose the step to push herself forward. And I've heard good things so far.
I did want to know what motivates you or drives you, especially in terms of your writing.
I think it's just to make the voices be quiet. I know this is going to sound a little insane, but really it's you start coming up with an idea and you just want to see it developed. I'm sure just like every director who creates a movie and everybody who writes a song or writes a poem or paints a picture, they have this vision in their head of something that they want to do, and they just want to see it in a tangible format and make it real, kind of thing. They just want, I remember asking an author once, somebody said, where do you come up with your ideas? And she's like, I don't know how to make them stop, kind of thing. And you're constantly coming up with ideas and characters and all these kinds of things, and they just kind of live in your head if you do nothing with them. And, to be able to, create something and create it into this like tangible format that other people can enjoy and read and whatever. I think that's kind of what drives me to do things. I want to see how the story ends. So, and unfortunately, I'm the only one who can write it.
Yeah.
So if you had something inspirational to say to people to get on that path, whether it's writing or just in life, to motivate them to move forward and do all these things that we're saying, what would you say to them?
Just do it. It's honestly, for a long time, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to write a book. And there's so many people I'm like, I'm so going to write a book one day. Yeah, you're not going to write a book until you write a book, kind of thing. And breaking things down into small steps. A book is a large undertaking. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. But just break it down. Break it down into pieces. Like, no matter what goal you were talking about running, you didn't run a marathon in a day. You didn't just be like, I'm going to run a marathon today. Off you go. You
I
probably
wouldn't be the type to do that. So.
you would try,
Yeah.
but I don't think your body would probably let you. But you need to break it down. Like, take your goals that you wanted to go for, and break it down into what makes sense for you. Maybe for you, it's 100 words a day. That's like a paragraph. And maybe it's going to take you 20 years to write that book. So be it. If that's what you want to do and that's what your life allows you to do and all that kind of stuff. But until you sit down and start writing those 100 words, it's never going to happen. Until you start, running around the block, and then twice, and then 3 times, and then 4 times. Marathon runners, tend to, I find, really understand the writing process better than anyone else. Because trying to explain that to other people, it's one of those things you don't really get until you've tried it, kind of thing. Like, you can kind of get the concept, but like there's a lot of self-deprecation and work that's involved that people just don't see, right? And doing it for yourself. Like, when you first write your first book, even if you're planning to do it for publication, nobody else knows that. So you're really writing that first book for yourself, regardless of what your motivations are.
Very true.
And marathons are the same thing. Like, yes, you want to win and you want to do this, but it's a lot more of you're doing it for yourself to finish, to be able to do those things. So I do find, oddly enough, because writers are probably least physical versus marathon runners who are like probably super fit, seem to get that mentality the best. Like they seem to understand a little bit more of like that putting in that work, even if it's a little bit at a time, just breaking off those pieces slowly to get where you want to go.
How can we stay up to date with Scarlett Kol and your upcoming novels and projects?
Okay, well, I do have my website, which is kind of my like stable point, www.scarlettkol.com, KOL, not COLE. And I am also on Facebook. I am on Twitter, and I am on Instagram. They're all under Scarlett Kol. I do have a Facebook readers group, Scarlett's Rebel Readers. I have a newsletter, which you can sign up on my website. I try not to plaster people because I don't like too much email myself. So 4 to 5 times a year max, unless I've got something on sale or just a quick little announcement. And then, so I'm usually lurking around social media as well. I'm local in Winnipeg. If anybody ever wants to email me or if they have questions or if they want to talk about writing, I'm open to that. And I'm also doing 3 conferences next year. So I will be at Book Lovers Con, in New Orleans. I will be in May. I will be in Literary Love Savannah in Savannah, Georgia in July. And I will be at PennCon in St. Louis in September.
That's a full
Awesome.
schedule right there.
Where can people buy your books? Off your site? Or
I have links off my site, but I haven't actually. Some people say that I should probably put up like autographed, like you can buy autograph copies. There's a lot of authors that do that. I haven't done that yet, but I might. At some point, you can get them at Amazon. If you are local, you can get them at McNally Robinson, both at the Forks and at Grant. If you are a Kobo reader, you can get it on Chapters Indigo. They're both the paperbacks and in print. Paperbacks and ebook on Barnes and Noble. So Nook readers, they are available as iBooks on iTunes, obviously Amazon, and in the States, Walmart.com.
There you go.
Nice.
Anywhere you can think of reading.
Yeah,
Fun.
exactly. Like all the majors is pretty much covered. So, and actually, Wicked Descent is also available on the Evernight Teen website as well. That's my publisher for that one.
Perfect. And as always, we're Be the Change. So if you have any emails for us in terms of content or anything you'd like to see on the show or anything that you'd like to share with us, send it to info@bethechangeyps, we'll get it right this time, .com. I don't think there's any announcements, probably no show next week because it's Thanksgiving and it's a long weekend and we got to spend some time with our families.
Got to eat food.
As always, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you happen to be listening or watching to this podcast. Maybe it's iTunes or Spotify. Any closing thoughts, Jayse?
Just thank you for being on. Best of luck in the future with your books and your future books.
Thank you.
I'll definitely give them a read when I have a chance. My book list has probably gotten over 50 now, but I'll fit it in there somewhere.
This was great. No, I was happy to have a fellow writer, but somebody who's published and who has a lot of insight into the writing world and even just to pick your brain on the amazing parts of your books and your story and all the experiences that you've been through. So it's been awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. It was lots of fun.
Awesome. Thanks, Scarlett.
Take care.